I was wondering if you have also advices for maintainers who want to start their own open source projects, especially with Rust in general. Any advice for them?
Absolutely. In my experience, a very strong predictor of how long you're going to be able to sustain working on an open source project is how easy to maintain it is. And we've seen this in projects that span the gamut, everything from semver checking to various compilers and very ambitious other projects in not just the Rust ecosystem but everywhere. If it becomes tedious to keep the lights on day to day, if it's difficult to make contributions, to make the project keep working, pass tests, things like that, it's going to be very difficult to remain motivated, to be honest, to continue upholding that project. You never really want to be in a situation where there's something that you have to do and you really don't feel like doing it. And I found, at least for me, it's very important to add a lot of emphasis on how am I going to make this very easy to maintain, very easy to test, have very fast, very good CI that catches all sorts of issues that I'm likely to find. And to have really good answers to these questions, maybe even spend a disproportionately large amount of time and effort having really good answers very early on in the project. So I can tell you a specific example of this from Trustfall, where Trustfall currently has something like 800 unit tests that test everything end to end in a sort of clever arrangement. They take only about a second to run. I have a script that takes an input query file and runs it through the entire compiler, through all of the stages of the compiler, and generates every intermediate step of every sort of stage of processing of the compiler. So an internal representation, a trace file of the execution, any errors or outputs that were generated, and all of this stuff. All of this stuff gets saved as files. They get committed into the repository and then get checked. They get checked in and then get checked on every commit. This is magical. Why? Because it's very easy for me to add new test cases, right? I just write a new query, I run the script checks in, half a dozen different files, automatically created, their snapshots. The behavior is pinned down. Trustfall is a deterministic compiler, so the same outputs happen every single time. And it also means that my unit tests are actually integration tests in a funny way. Because the way that the tests are set up is we take the input to every stage, we run it through that stage, we get some result, we deserialize the expected result, we compare those two for equality. But there's another test that takes the expected output of that stage, uses it as input to the next stage, and tests there. And same for the stage after that, and same for the stage after that. And so by composition, we can actually see that the same input produces the same final result, while at the same time, if something is broken, we don't have to go debug an integration test that is broken somewhere in between. We see, aha, the exact output changed between point A and point B, and so this is where the problem must be, right? Not over there and not over there. And that's really, really nice. And it's super nice to be able to just run cargo tests and have instant feedback 1 second later over this gigantic test suite. And so that means that Trustfall is very unlikely to have bugs, which means that I don't spend a lot of time triaging things and debugging things and things like that. It also means that when a bug does happen, it's quite easy to reproduce. Just write a buggy query, save the results, fix the bug, see how everything changed, check in the generated files, and that bug is never ever coming back. And this enables a very virtuous feedback loop where development is fast, and so it's bug-free, and so it's fast, and so it's bug-free, and so there are a lot of features that are bug-free, and so people use it and find more bugs. And this is a very, very positive feedback loop, which results in happy users and a happy, productive maintainer, because I don't have to debug things, all the time for everyone.
That's really impressive. Congrats. It sounds like a dream to work on a project like this. Congrats. I wanted to ask you, are there any libraries that you are using in this process that makes it easier? to
Yeah, I use Certi to serialize and deserialize all of the inputs and expected outputs. I really like the RON format. It's kind of like JSON, but for Rust. It's Rusty object notation. And so that means that it's very explicit about enum variants and specific types. Like, is this number an integer or a float? Is it an I64 or a U64? All of these things, which matter quite a bit for a compiler system and that wants to be strongly type safe. So it's been very pleasant to debug with those. And honestly, just in general, every crate that I've used in the Rust ecosystem has had such a high quality bar, especially coming from some of these other ecosystems that I've used stuff in. Obviously, every ecosystem has some extremely high quality crates, but in Rust, if you just grabbed a random crate off of Crates.io, odds are it has a very solid test suite and good documentation, and everything is like nicely thought out, and the API is pleasant to use. And so, just in general, WASM, BindGen, Pio3, I've been absolutely blown away by how easy it is to use these things. And in turn, that makes it easy to build things like cargo sever checks, right? Building trustfall adapters is super easy because I don't have to muck about with how is this JSON format deserialized. It's, the Rust doc component for Rust has a Certi definition for the types that it generates. So that's strongly typed. There's a crates.io crate that exports the Certi definitions. That means that I can just grab that crate and just reuse it. And so that means that if the format changes, that's a compile time, compile error. So it's just caught immediately. If cargo check passes when on the new format, everything is great. Almost certainly everything is fine. If something is not fine, the test suite catches it anyway. It's again one of those very pleasant positive feedback loops where everything just keeps working. So it's an absolute dream to be developing in this ecosystem.
Nice, yes. Yeah, I agree that like the average quality of a library in Rust is pretty high because just the fact that it compiles, that like it's trade safe, it doesn't have memory issues and so on. So yeah, in general, I had very few issues with Rust libraries. Yes. We have a question from the chat from Orun. He asks, I'm just curious about how was your experience promoting your open source projects? Any tips, advice?
Yeah, it's definitely a little bit tricky. It's always building comes naturally to a lot of us, and promoting our work can be difficult. It can often be uncomfortable, to sort of put yourself out there. I think the most important thing to keep in mind is that the community is very welcoming. People generally are very happy and supportive of new projects. It doesn't have to be perfect. It doesn't have to be polished. Especially if you tell people up front, hey, this is something I started working on. It's not perfect yet, but what do you think? People are going to be very accepting. So just feel free to put your stuff out there. r/Rust has been a very positive community for me. So I wrote some blog posts about cargo sever checks, about trustfall, and I put them on r/Rust. Generally got very positive feedback on a lot of that stuff. People actually engaged, dug in, and took a look and were generally very, very supportive and helpful, and often even offered advice and made concrete suggestions. Even sometimes made pull requests to fix issues. So that was very, very helpful for me. It's especially helpful if when you write a blog post, you explain the motivation for why you're building the tool that you're building, right? So answer, what is the problem that you're solving? Why no other tool solves that problem? Or if another tool solves the problem, how's your thing any different? What other thing are you exploring? Sort of what are the tenets of your project that might make somebody pick it over something else, if there is even something else? And as much as it is a bit of a tired trope, explaining it like, it's X for Y, can often be helpful for people to sort of just get in the right sort of mindset, right? So explaining, trustfall, like it's a query engine, but over any data source, right? It's not 100% correct explanation, right? There's obviously some nuance here and there, but it gets you sort of in the right mindset, and then you can explain all of the nuances and how things are different. But at the end of the day, the most important thing is just getting your stuff out there, not being afraid to speak up about your work. Write blog posts, post about it on social media, post about it on r/rust, and honestly, just don't take detractors too seriously, because if they don't like it, they're free to not use it, right? What's the worst that can happen? They can have 100% of their money back for not using your open source project, right? And of course, there's always going to be some places. I think Hacker News is somewhat deservedly famous for this, where people might not necessarily take too deep of a look into your project and might be like, "Oh, this is terrible, and this is completely incorrectly designed, and is a terrible fit." This happened to me a few weeks ago. Cargo Server Checks was on the front page of Hacker News, and somebody was like, "This project is terrible, and the way that it should actually work is," and proceeded to explain exactly the same way that Cargo Server Checks works, right? And do your best to stay positive and be constructive. So I jumped in with a comment and I said, "Hey, that's actually exactly what Cargo Server Checks does. The one place where it doesn't, it's actually explicitly planned to do that in a future version. We just haven't gotten around to it yet. Thank you for the feedback," kind of thing. And sometimes people will say, "Oh yeah, totally, like, thank you," or like, "I misread it," or "I misunderstood." Sometimes they might just double down. They might say, "You're completely wrong. You didn't even read the README." That's what happens to me. In that situation, again, don't take it too seriously. I broke open the metaphorical popcorn and enjoyed the show, because somebody else then pointed out to this user that I was actually the author of the crate. I wrote the README, and so accusing me of not having read the README is a little bit funny. I totally understand that this is uncomfortable. This is something that is just going to happen. It's a big world out there, and if you're not really ready for this, then just don't check Hacker News for your projects. And I think that's totally fine. I found that r/rust and generally the Rust circles on social media are very, very supportive. So don't be afraid to put your work out there, even if it isn't perfect. I think people for the most part are super nice, and the few oddball people that maybe are not going to dig into your project too deeply, you don't really have to pay them too much mind.
Yeah, I tried to post something on Hacker News, but my posts get lost in the void. Instead, yeah, I found the Reddit Rust community like more interested, of course, in Rust. But yeah, in general, I found it welcoming. Yeah, they I recommend to share your stuff there. Also, because if you only share it via your socials, you always end up reaching your bubble. Instead, if you go to other websites, you reach more people, of course. Yes, and sometimes it's hard to share your projects because, like, I don't know, you feel a bit guilty that you're spamming and so on, but you need to go over this feeling, and yeah, you need to spam.
100% agreed. And I feel like it's completely fine to once every few weeks, once a month, say, "Hey, I wrote a blog post about a new thing that I built in my project." I don't think anybody's going to blame you for that. In the worst case, people just keep scrolling, and that's fine. A lot of the time, though, people are genuinely curious. They will want to know what sorts of things you've been up to, especially if there's an interesting challenge that you overcame that might be helpful to them. If you can frame it as, "Here is an unusual solution I had to a problem," or tell people why they should read your blog posts. Tell people why you're excited about it. Most of the time, people respond to enthusiasm with enthusiasm. And so I feel like people are a lot more accepting of, quote unquote spam. If it's not really spam, if it's genuine content, that's, thoughtfully written, and not like, once a day, the same thing over and over again, but a different thing that you've put in, poured your heart and soul into genuinely, and is not just like a, shameless self-promotion and like just like spamming the same post over and over again.
Yeah, you're right. It's not spam. I was just it was a joke, yes, but it's better to clarify. Maybe you can think about, okay, what if another maintainer does the same post as mine, what is my reaction if I read it? Like if I read Predrag's update about trustful or cargo sender checks, I'm happy. So uh, maybe you should do the same. Yes. We have another question from Orun. Thank you. Uh, how do you deal with burnout? What are the things that you do outside of software development?
Definitely. In my experience, there's there are sort of two strategies here, and I think they're both important, and it's not an either or, you need to do both. One is to have things that you thoroughly enjoy doing that are unrelated to software development. So my things, I love playing board games. I play some computer games, with friends especially. I like to play ice hockey, and that's something I do on a regular basis. So it's not just coding that gives my life meaning. There's all sorts of other stuff that I really enjoy. And every so often, if you're frustrated with a piece of code or something, it can just be super useful to go out for a walk, go for a run, go hit a puck a few times. It can be very cathartic to overcome mental load, mental burden with like putting some like physical effort into things, and it can be very very satisfying that way. I think the other thing that is complementary to this is attempting to deal with the sources of burnout more directly by addressing them or by preventing them from happening in the first place. So these are things like, oh my goodness, I can't believe that I need to do the same maintenance task over and over again, for no obvious benefit or for no feedback or anything like that, right? And so you can structure your development of your package to try to avoid and minimize these kinds of situations. Uh, you can be very explicit about setting expectations with your community. So, for example, if someone opens an issue on cargo server checks and says, "Hey, I ran cargo server checks and it didn't catch this obviously buggy, broken, breaking change in my APIs. Here's an issue." I'll say, "Thank you so much for opening that issue. As you can see in the README, there are lots of issues that we don't currently catch. Sorry about that. But because it's stated there in the README, the expectations were set, and so it helps users not be frustrated when these things happen, because hopefully at least some of them have read the README. And even if somebody maybe hasn't dug into the right portion of the FAQ, I can still point to them to that, and it again reinforces this sort of healthy dynamic between me and the community, so that I don't get burnt out by being blamed for functionality that doesn't yet exist, right? And it's especially useful when people in the Rust community like to be very helpful and like to be positive. And so every so often, when I say, "Hey, sorry, that's not implemented yet," they say, "Oh, would you take a pull request?" And I say, "Great, I'd love that. I will happily mentor. I will help as much as I can." And that's what happened with Marco. One day, he opened an issue and was like, "Hey, there is no API for cargo server checks. It's a binary. It's not a library. I'd love to use it as a library." I said, "That sounds great. I personally don't have time to do this, but I'll take a pull request." And lo and behold, there was a pull request, and now there's a library for it. So I think it's very important to be aware of the things that are causing you to move toward the burnout end of that axis, and to figure out ways to addressing them for preventing those situations from happening as often or from affecting you as negatively, um, before you really get to the bad stages of burnout as much as you can. Once you're really burnt out, it can take a while to come back. Speaking from personal experience, I think a lot of us have gotten to that point at some point. And so it's one of those things, kind of like breaking changes, where an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. So better to not end up in that state in general. And here I'll extend an arm out to maintainers everywhere out there. If you feel like you're getting burnt out and you're not really sure what to do about it, please feel free to reach out to me on social media. I'm very happy to take some time to chat and walk you through some of my strategies, hear you out, and talk about what is getting you burnt out, and just see if there's anything that I can do to help, give some advice, or even just lend an ear and let you vent for a few minutes. Even that can be cathartic and helpful. That's something that I've had the benefit of doing with people in my community, and I'd be very happy to extend that courtesy to anyone else out there listening to this.
Yeah, thank you for your advices. They were really golden. So I agree that like you should put boundaries. So like if somebody asks for a feature request, it's not mandatory that you need to do it immediately. Like you can say, yeah, PR is welcome. Feel free to contribute. And also, I found very helpful to chat with your peers. So maybe other maintainers like you, you can share your issues, how you can ask how they deal with it, and so on. That's very helpful for me too. Yeah. So
Absolutely. And at the end of the day, we're all in this together. You're not the only person running into the issue that you're running into, whether it's burnout, whether it's a social concern, whether it's a how do I promote my project, whether it's a technical issue like my code isn't working. And so ask for help. A lot of the time, people are very happy to help if you post on social media, if you post on r/rust, if you just ask a friend. So just don't keep it internal. Share with the community, and people will step in and generally be very helpful.
yeah, there's nothing wrong to say like, okay, this is not the best period. For example, I will stop developing new features. People are, I think, they are really comprehensive in these cases. Yeah, they understand. Yeah.